The afternoon sun streamed through the dusty windows of Sterling Antiques as Harold Morrison pushed through the heavy glass door, the brass bell announcing his arrival with a tired chime. The 68-year-old veteran moved carefully, his left leg dragging slightly from old shrapnel wounds that never quite healed right. In his weathered hands, he clutched a small leather case, worn smooth by decades of careful handling. The shop buzzed with Saturday afternoon energy as customers examined everything from Victorian jewelry to Depression-era furniture. Behind the main counter stood Marcus Sterling, a man in his 40s whose expensive suit and perfectly styled hair suggested he valued appearance above all else. His voice carried across the shop as he dismissed another customer's family heirloom with casual cruelty. Harold approached the counter slowly, his worn veteran's cap casting shadows over eyes that had seen too much. He placed the leather case gently on the polished wood surface, treating it like the precious cargo it was. Marcus glanced up from his paperwork, his expression already shifting to one of barely concealed annoyance. The sight of Harold's simple clothes and careful movements seemed to confirm whatever prejudgments were already forming in his mind. "What do you have there?" Pops Marcus asked, his tone suggesting he expected nothing worthwhile. "Some old military junk nobody wants anymore." Harold opened the case with reverent care, revealing a brass compass nestled in faded green felt. The instrument showed its age but remained beautifully crafted, with intricate engravings barely visible beneath years of handling. "This belonged to my father," Harold said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of memory. "He carried it through Normandy, all the way to Berlin. I was hoping you could tell me something about its history, maybe its value." Marcus picked up the compass with casual disregard, turning it over in his hands like examining a piece of junk at a garage sale. His laugh was sharp and dismissive, loud enough to draw attention from nearby customers. "Military surplus," he announced to the growing audience. "Probably made by the thousands. These things are worthless nowadays. Every flea market in America has boxes of them." A woman examining china nearby looked over with interest. "Oh, another fake war story," she said with a knowing smile. "My ex-husband tried to sell me the same line about his grandfather's medals. Turned out they were reproductions he bought online." Harold's face reddened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "My father earned the Medal of Honor at Omaha Beach. This compass guided his unit through some of the worst fighting of the war." Marcus held the compass up dramatically, addressing his growing audience like a performer. "Medal of Honor, right?" he said with theatrical skepticism. "And I suppose this little compass here saved the entire Allied invasion. Let me guess, it also belonged to General Patton and was blessed by FDR personally." The customers laughed appreciatively at Marcus's performance, clearly enjoying the entertainment at Harold's expense. A middle-aged man in an expensive polo shirt stepped closer to examine the compass. "These military collectors are all the same," he said with authority. "They make up these elaborate stories to try and inflate the value of common items. I bet if you looked online, you could buy this exact compass for $20. Before we continue, let us know where you are watching from and what time it is for you. Your comment helps our community grow stronger. Thanks, and let us get back to the story." Harold stood silently as the crowd grew around Marcus's impromptu appraisal show. More customers drifted over, drawn by the laughter and Marcus's increasingly theatrical presentation. The veteran's hands shook slightly, whether from age or emotion, as he watched strangers mock his father's memory. "My father never talked much about the war," Harold tried again, his voice growing quieter as the crowd grew louder. "But he told me this compass saved his life more than once. The unit he served with, the 1st Infantry Division, they called themselves the Big Red One." "Oh, the Big Red One," Marcus repeated mockingly. "How convenient. One of the most famous divisions in military history. Why not claim he served with easy company while we are at it?" "Sir, with all due respect, every military collector claims their items belong to famous units or heroes." The woman with the china set down her examination pieces to focus entirely on the unfolding drama. "This is exactly why I never trust military memorabilia," she declared. "Too many people trying to cash in on our veterans' real sacrifices with fake stories and reproduction items." Harold's jaw tightened, but he maintained his dignity despite the growing humiliation. He looked down at the compass in Marcus's careless hands, watching as the appraiser continued to handle his father's treasure like worthless scrap metal. The compass itself was actually remarkable, Though Marcus's inexperienced eye failed to recognize its true nature. The brass housing bore the distinctive markings of instruments manufactured specifically for elite reconnaissance units during World War II. The precision of its construction and the quality of its materials far exceeded standard military-issue equipment. But Marcus saw only what he expected to see, another piece of military surplus trying to masquerade as something valuable. A younger man in the crowd pulled out his smartphone and began searching. "I'm looking up similar compasses online right now," he announced. "Yeah, here we go. Military-style compass, vintage-looking, $29.99 on eBay. Buy it now price." Marcus clapped his hands together theatrically. There you have it, folks. $30 worth of mass-produced military memorabilia being passed off as a priceless family heirloom. This is exactly the kind of fraud that gives legitimate antique dealing a bad name. The crowd murmured its agreement, clearly enjoying the spectacle of deflating what they perceived as another inflated military story. Harold stood among them like a man weathering a storm, his dignity intact despite the assault on his father's memory. What none of them knew was that at that very moment, a black sedan was pulling into the parking space directly in front of Sterling Antiques. The woman stepping out of the passenger seat wore the crisp dress blue uniform of a United States Army general, for silver stars gleaming on her shoulders. Her aide-de-camp, a sharp young captain, hurried to keep pace as she strode toward the shop in trance with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. General Patricia Morrison had received a concerning phone call from her father 20 minutes earlier. Harold had mentioned his plans to visit an antique shop to learn more about his father's compass, but something in his voice had worried her. Now, as she approached the shop, she could hear raised voices and laughter through the glass windows. Inside the shop, Marcus was building to his grand finale, holding the compass high like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly why you should always bring military items to certified appraisers. We have the expertise to separate genuine artifacts from wishful thinking and family mythology." Harold reached out his hand toward the compass. "Could I please have it back?" Marcus held it just out of reach, still playing to his audience. "In a moment, sir. I think it is important that everyone here learns to recognize these common reproduction items. Notice how the brass has been artificially aged, probably with chemicals. And these engravings, see how shallow they are. Real period pieces would show much deeper, more precise craftsmanship." The bell above the door chimed again, but the sound was lost in the crowd's continued laughter and Marcus's ongoing performance. General Morrison stepped into the shop, her trained eyes immediately assessing the situation. She saw her father standing surrounded by laughing strangers, saw a man in an expensive suit holding something that belonged to her family, and felt her jaw clench with controlled anger. The general's presence began to register with customers near the door first. Conversations faltered as people noticed the impressive military figure surveying the scene. The 4 stars on her shoulders were unmistakable symbols of authority that even civilians recognized instinctively. Marcus, still focused on his performance, remained oblivious to the change in atmosphere. He continued his theatrical examination of the compass, turning it over in his hands while describing its supposed flaws to his captivated audience. "You see how the weight feels wrong," he was saying. "Genuine World War II military instruments had a very specific heft to them. This feels too light, probably made with modern materials designed to look old." The crowd's attention began to shift as more people noticed the general making her way through the shop. Her aide-de-camp followed closely, his own bearing clearly military despite his youth. Together, they moved through the antique displays with the purposeful stride of people on a mission. Harold looked up and saw his daughter approaching, her face set in the expression he recognized from childhood, calm on the surface but burning with controlled fury underneath. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by concern about what was about to happen. Marcus finally noticed the change in his audience's attention and turned to see what had captured their focus. His theatrical smile faltered slightly as he took in the general's impressive uniform and unmistakable authority, but his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. Well, he said, raising his voice to address the new arrival. "Another military enthusiast, I see. Perfect timing. I was just explaining to everyone here how to identify reproduction military items masquerading as authentic pieces." General Morrison stopped directly in front of the counter, her eyes moving from her father's embarrassed face to the compass in Marcus's careless grip. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority that had commanded respect from thousands of soldiers over decades of service. That compass, she said clearly, belonged to my grandfather. The shop fell completely silent. Marcus's confident smile wavered as he processed the general's words and began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. The crowd of customers who had been laughing moments before now stood in stunned silence, suddenly aware that they had witnessed something far more serious than a simple antique evaluation gone wrong. General Morrison continued, her voice never rising but carrying absolute authority. Staff Sergeant William Morrison, 1st Infantry Division. Medal of Honor recipient for extraordinary heroism at Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944. That compass guided his reconnaissance team through German lines for 72 hours straight, providing critical intelligence that saved hundreds of Allied lives. Marcus's face had gone pale. He looked down at the compass in his hands as if seeing it for the first time, finally understanding that he held not a reproduction but a genuine piece of American military history. The woman who had mocked Harold's story earlier took a step backward, her face flushing with shame. The man who had looked up similar compasses on eBay quietly put his phone away, unable to meet anyone's eyes. General Morrison stepped closer to the counter, her 4 stars catching the afternoon light. My father served 2 tours in Vietnam, she continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the now silent shop. Purple Heart, Silver Star, Bronze Star with V device for valor. He spent 18 months in a VA hospital learning to walk again after stepping on a mine while carrying wounded soldiers to safety. Harold stood straighter despite his physical limitations, his daughter's words washing away the humiliation he had endured. The compass remained in Marcus's suddenly trembling hands, but its meaning had transformed completely in the eyes of everyone present. The general's aide-de-camp stepped forward and presented a leather portfolio. Ma'am, the documentation you requested. Inside were photocopied military records, commendation letters, and most importantly, a detailed inventory of equipment issued to Staff Sergeant Morrison's reconnaissance unit, including 1 precision brass compass, serial number matching the instrument Marcus still held. General Morrison opened the portfolio and read from the top document. Quote, Staff Sergeant Morrison's navigation skills and precision instruments proved invaluable during extended reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines. His compass readings were consistently accurate under the most challenging combat conditions, contributing directly to mission success and the preservation of American lives. End quote. She looked up at Marcus, whose theatrical confidence had completely evaporated. That precision instrument you dismissed as worthless military surplus was manufactured specifically for elite reconnaissance units. Only 300 were ever produced. Military historians consider them among the most significant navigation instruments of the European theater. The silence in the shop was complete except for the distant sound of traffic outside. Marcus struggled to find words, his earlier arrogance replaced by growing horror at his public humiliation of a military family's treasured heirloom. The young man who had found similar compasses online cleared his throat nervously. General, ma'am, I apologize. I was looking at mass-produced replicas, not authentic pieces. I had no idea. General Morrison's expression softened slightly toward the genuinely repentant customers, but her eyes remained steel when they returned to Marcus. The issue is not ignorance, she said clearly. The issue is the fundamental disrespect shown to a decorated veteran and his family's military heritage. She gestured toward her father with obvious pride. This man served his country with distinction, survived combat that would break most people, and came here today simply hoping to learn more about his father's service. Instead, he was mocked, ridiculed, and humiliated by people who chose to assume the worst rather than show basic human respect. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. General, I apologize. I made a terrible mistake. I should have examined the compass more carefully, should have listened to your father's story. General Morrison held up a hand, stopping his stammered apology. This is not about your professional competence, Mr. Sterling. This is about your character. You turned my father's respectful inquiry into a public spectacle designed to humiliate him for your customers' entertainment. The customers who had laughed and joined in the mockery now stood in various stages of shame and regret. The woman who had compared Harold's story to her ex-husband's fabrications stepped forward hesitantly. Sir, she said to Harold, her voice shaking slightly, I owe you a sincere apology. I made assumptions that were completely unfair and disrespectful. Your father's service and sacrifice deserve honor, not the treatment you received here today." One by one, the other customers who had participated in the mockery offered their own apologies. Harold accepted each with the grace and dignity that had sustained him through decades of service and sacrifice, never showing bitterness despite the pain they had caused him. General Morrison carefully took the compass from Marcus's unresisting hands and presented it to her father with the ceremony it deserved. "Dad, Grandpa's compass belongs with you, where it has always belonged. Its value cannot be measured in dollars because its worth lies in the courage, sacrifice, and honor it represents." Harold accepted the compass with hands that no longer trembled, his daughter's vindication having restored not just his dignity, but his faith in the fundamental decency that still existed in the world. He opened the case and looked down at the brass instrument that had guided his father through the darkest chapter of human history. Marcus struggled to process the complete reversal of everything he thought he understood about the situation. "General," he said desperately, "is there anything I can do to make this right? I realize now that I handled this completely inappropriately." General Morrison considered his question seriously. "You can start by educating yourself about military history and the significance of veteran service before you evaluate their treasured possessions. You can treat every customer, regardless of their appearance or circumstances, with the respect that basic human dignity demands." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "And you can remember that behind every military artifact is a human story of service, sacrifice, and often heroism that deserves honor, not ridicule." The general's aide-de-camp had been quietly taking notes throughout the exchange. "Ma'am, he S.A. ID respectfully. The Smithsonian curator you spoke with earlier expressed significant interest in documenting Staff Sergeant Morrison's service record and equipment. This compass would be welcome in their World War II collection, though obviously the decision belongs to the family." Harold looked up at his daughter with surprise and pride. "Patricia, you contacted the Smithsonian." General Morrison smiled, the first time her expression had warmed since entering the shop. "Dad, Grandpa's story deserves to be preserved and honored. His compass helped save lives during the most important conflict in human history. Future generations should know about heroes like him." The transformation in the shop's atmosphere was complete. What had begun as a scene of mockery and humiliation had become a powerful lesson in respect, dignity, and the true meaning of service. Customers who had participated in ridiculing Harold now stood as witnesses to his vindication and their own education. Marcus looked around his shop, seeing it differently now through the lens of his public humiliation and moral failure. The antiques that had seemed so important moments before now felt trivial compared to the lesson in human decency he had just received. General Morrison prepared to leave, her mission accomplished and her father's honor restored. But before departing, she turned back to address the assembled customers one final time. "Every day, veterans like my father walk among us quietly, carrying the memories of their service and the treasures of their family's military heritage. They deserve our respect, our gratitude, and our willingness to listen to their stories rather than our rush to judgment and mockery." She gestured toward Harold, who stood taller now despite his physical limitations. "These men and women served something greater than themselves, sacrificed years of their lives, and often their health, to protect the freedoms we enjoy today. The least we can do is treat them with the dignity they have earned." As father and daughter prepared to leave Sterling Antiques together, Harold carefully secured his father's compass in its worn leather case. The instrument that had been dismissed as worthless reproduction had revealed itself as a priceless piece of American military history, just as the elderly veteran who carried it had proven himself to be far more than the humble figure he appeared to be. The other customers began to disperse, many stopping to shake Harold's hand and thank him for his service. The mockery and laughter that had filled the shop 30 minutes earlier had been replaced by a profound sense of respect and gratitude that would linger long after the Morrisons departed. Marcus stood behind his counter, forever changed by witnessing the complete destruction of his arrogant assumptions and the powerful vindication of a hero he had failed to recognize. The compass was gone, but the lesson it had delivered would remain with everyone who witnessed its revelation, a permanent reminder that true worth often lies hidden beneath humble appearances, waiting for those wise enough to look beyond the surface.